Chapter 1. The phone rang at just gone 3 on that late October morning. It drilled into my skull and shattered my dream, unrelenting until I reached for the handset on the bedside table. They say it's the calls you get in the small hours that are the ones you will never forget. Well, I guess they're hardly likely to be bringing good news. But I wasn't thinking of that as I cleared my throat. Hello, Hawkins. I kept my voice low, not wanting to disturb Marcia in the twin bed next to mine. The voice at the other end was familiar, the adjutant of the parachute regiment. Hi, Jimbo. Sorry to disturb your beauty sleep. He wasn't quite his usual chirpy self. He sounded a little weary round the edges. What is it, Bill? World War III broken out? Nah, that stuff's all over now, Jimbo. You really must keep up with things. My first name isn't Jimbo, or even Jim. It's Jeff. But with a surname like Hawkins, it was inevitable that someone would see the initial J and make the Treasure Island connection. So it had been Jimbo to my army colleagues ever since my induction to the parachute regiment as a boy soldier 24 years earlier, before I took the scenic route in my career, finally making warrant officer first class before being commissioned. Stop pissing about, Bill, I said, and spit it out. How soon can you be ready to leave? I glared down at the handset in the dark. I'm not on standby. I know. How soon? This is an emergency. I threw back the duvet and swung my legs off the bed, now fully awake. I don't know. 48 hours? Make that 24, will you? There's a lot of hairy shit going down in Bosnia just now. I've had a call from the MOD asking for you personally. I've got to confirm back immediately. Someone's getting their knickers in a twist. I was surprised. I'm flattered. Suddenly the bedside lamp behind me snapped on, throwing the bedroom into twilight. Marcia was awake, and I could smell trouble already. Who is it, Jeff? She sounded anxious. Is it my mother? The kids? I put my hand over the mouthpiece. Everything's fine. It's just Bill. Something's come up. That's ridiculous. You retire next year. Can't they leave you alone? I didn't reply. Just turned my back on her and returned to my telephone conversation. So, what's happened? A liaison officer with the Royal Wessex in Unadrina has gone down with acute appendicitis. Emergency case fac. Bad timing. They want someone with experience to fill his boots. Your name came up. Now I knew. The Hereford connection. A while back I'd done a 3-year tour with 22 Special Air Service Regiment. Liaison, in this context, meant negotiating ceasefires with the warring factions, doing some hearts and minds, and accruing intelligence. Some of the exact qualities that are honed during SAS service. And, of course, the fact that my stepmother originally came from Belgrade. I'd spent a lot of my childhood holidays in the former Yugoslavia, and I spoke the lingo fluently, was on their records. Sometimes it's said that Hereford never really lets go of its former members. Nevertheless, infantry battalion liaison officers, or LOs, were invariably drawn from the same cap badge or brigade. Pulling in an outsider, and a para at that, even if I did have specialist knowledge and experience, is hardly going to make me flavour of the month. How long's the deployment? I asked. The Royal Wessex have been there for 3 months, so you're looking at another 3. There's a midday flight out of Lynham for Split tomorrow. I'll get back with more details. I said, Can't you count? That's more like 9 hours, not 24. Go with the flow, Jimbo. It'll win 1 Paris and brownie points for the MOD. It was pointless to resist. I said, OK, Bill. Cheers. No, one more thing. What? Pack your thermals. You can get bloody freezing out there. Ciao. I shook my head and smiled to myself as I replaced the handset. "What the hell's happening, Jeff?" Marcia demanded. "Where are they sending you? Not bloody Bosnia." I turned back to look at her. A year younger than me, Marcia hadn't been a bad-looking woman when we'd met and married after I passed out in the barras, but she'd never been good army wife material and always resented the way it had become the third partner in our marriage. After our 2 kids were born, she'd neglected herself and had steadily put on the extra pounds. Long, dyed black hair now framed a still pretty but pudgy face that seemed to wear a continuously sour expression, as if she'd just sucked on a mothball. "At least someone loves me," I said, standing up and pulling on my dressing gown. But she missed the sarcasm. "They said you wouldn't see active service again," she muttered. "Too bloody true. Due to be pensioned off at the tender age of 45, I've been driving a desk round Aldershot HQ for the past year, and it was doing my head in." "It wasn't a promise," I pointed out. "And we've got Ralph and Celeste coming round for supper on Saturday." Marcia's bridge club friends. Oh, that was one damn good reason to head for Bosnia. I said, "You just have to manage without me, like you always have." I left for the bathroom. As I ran the shower, I stared at my own image in the mirror as the glass began to mist. 44 years old, fairish hair that was thinning a little and grey at the temples, a face a little too weathered for my years due to a lifetime in the outdoors, too many cigars, and too much booze. But I could still recognize a light of mischievous humour in the blue eyes and the same crooked smile that had been there in the years of my misspent youth. My body had survived better, still muscular, lean and taut, from a job that involved relentless physical activity. I leaned more closely towards the mirror and ran a hand over the bristles on my chin. "Well, Jimbo, life's full of surprises," I mumbled under my breath. "Thought you were on the scrap heap. Now suddenly you're getting another slice of the action. Last Chance Saloon." Of course, there was no way I'd get back to sleep. So after my shower, I went downstairs to the living room of our 3-bedroom semi on the outskirts of Aldershot, poured a slug of whiskey into a mug of black coffee, and lit a miniature vanilla cigar. I'd given up cigarettes years before, and didn't need to inhale on these strong little fellas to get my nicotine fix. I started to go through all the tedious domestic paperwork I'd have to clear before I left. Bills to pay, letter from the bank that needed a reply, car tax renewal form. But my mind wasn't really on the job. In those days, in the early 90s, television and the newspapers were full of Bosnia. The mayhem, the fighting, the massacres, the ethnic cleansing, the refugees, and the humanitarian aid effort by the United Nations. Of course, being in the army and knowing some of our lads were deployed there wearing the blue berets of the United Nations Protection Force, UNPROFOR, I took a particular interest in the situation. Whereas most of the general public threw up their hands in horror at the complexity of the situation, I made it my business to get a general understanding of what was going on. At the end of the Cold War, the disparate Balkan states that had been held together under the yoke of communism to form Yugoslavia fell apart, each seeking independence from the dominant Serbs. Slovenia had managed to slip from Belgrade's grasp early on, and Croatia's large and antagonistic population made it impossible for the Yugoslav army to control for long. Thereafter, the real battle was for who controlled the largely Muslim region of Bosnia-Herzegovina in the centre and its capital, Sarajevo. The situation wasn't helped by the fact that over the years all the ethnic groups had spread throughout the region, with enclaves or villages or towns full of one group living within an area run by another. In Bosnia, there were Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Serbs, and in some places, Bosnian Croats. It made the Northern Ireland problem look simple. Germany had been first to officially recognise Bosnia-Herzegovina, soon followed by the rest of the EU countries. Eventually, the United Nations followed. At that point, the UN was rather obliged to step in with humanitarian aid and try to stop everyone from killing each other. That's when UNPROFOR was formed, to which Britain made a large contribution. By the time I'd finished my domestic admin, it was 7 o'clock, and Marcia was up, stomping round the kitchen as she made her morning tea. She had this incredible, almost telepathic way of letting you know she was in a petulant mood, and that you were the reason for it. Negative energy seemed to emanate from her very being, until her hostility tainted the air like ozone. I took the opportunity to escape back to the bedroom to pack my Bergen. It wouldn't take long. It was permanently half full with essentials, and I had a checklist of stuff I'd need for any type of climate and mission. The only downside to this sudden deployment was that I'd missed Christmas with the kids. Lucy and Joe, born just a year apart, were both away at university and had gone to Ibiza to work as club reps over the summer, so I hadn't seen much of them that year. Carefully, I put a small framed photo of the two of them on the top of my Bergen. Then I strapped it up before realizing that the picture of Marcia I always took with me on deployment was still on my bedside table. I left it there and drove to town to pick up a few crucial provisions I guessed would be in short supply in Bosnia. Whiskey and vanilla cigars would be two of them. When I walked back into the house a couple of hours later, the phone was ringing. It was Bill with the final details. I was a bit surprised when he told me I'd be met off the C-130 Hercules transport at Split Airport on the Croatian coast by no less than Brigadier Alan Stowell, the commander of British forces in the Balkans. It seemed that in typical British fashion, the MOD had appointed its own commander between our deployed units and the UN general whose orders they were supposed to follow. It was our way of letting Johnny Foreigner, at the United Nations, know that we didn't fully trust him to play with our soldiers. I was mystified. My role was to be a fairly humble battalion LO to the Royal Wessex, reporting to its CO on local matters. Brigadier Stowell, on the other hand, as CBF, had fielded his own independent network of UK LOs, mostly Special Forces guys, to report to him direct. So, why was the Brigadier and his G2, the Intelligence and Security Chief, going to meet me for the briefing, as well as my opposite number, the UK LO in Unadrina? Marcia came down the stairs just as I hung up. "Well, I suppose I'd better be off," I said. Her expression didn't change a fraction. "I suppose you must. RAF Lynham, is it?" I nodded. "All right. And call, when and if I can." It was my way of saying, don't hold your breath. But I knew she wouldn't anyway. She gave a bleak little smile and offered her cheek for me to kiss. "Take care," she said. She didn't wave me off. By 5 o'clock that night, I was high over the Adriatic, sharing the noisy, cold RAF C-130 with a huge mountain of urgent military supplies that sat under a cargo net in front of me, and half a dozen other replacement personnel. It seemed that yet again a British government had salami-chopped our armed forces at a time of increasing commitment. So we were topping up unit strength in theatre by poaching members from other regiments and increasingly relying on the Territorial Army to plug specialist gaps. As I felt the distinct cant of the aircraft's wings and its nose dip for descent over the Croatian coast, my own sense of anticipation soared until the adrenaline rush of old was back, the same as ever. I had thought my days in action were over. Now it seemed they might return with a vengeance. We hit the tarmac with a thud, and the old workhorse trundled down the runway towards the terminal building until we gradually came to a standstill and the 4 propeller engines wound down. There was a 10-minute